Well, as I remember Johnson, he was one of the most accessible to the press in modern time press. I remember the wire service reporters used to be in the White House almost all the time. We were in the press room, and Johnson used to send his press secretary out to get Helen Thomas of UPI and me from Associated Press, and he'd call us in and sit us down opposite him in the cabinet room table and talk about Vietnam and all his problems with Vietnam. He would always put it off the record. And in those days, we all honored off the record. So we sat and listened to him as he told us about his problems, and it was fascinating. He also had interesting things that he used to do with the press. One of the things was to have press conferences, everyone angling for position on the turns, and it was, I remember one time Peter Lysigor was a well-known reporter of the time. He ran into a light pole and knocked himself out. He's so busy taking notes. So this was Johnson's way of being with the press and at the same time kind of keeping them all at their wits. And in the early days when he first came to the White House, he used to be very fond of capturing, take us in, time to go to bed, and he was carrying on. We ran out of paper, and of course at the end he said, it's all off the record. Another interesting music dance with all of the women reporters at White House receptions, and he was 6'4" and I'm 5'1", so it was always kind of strange dancing partner. So once I saw that he was out at a party and he was dancing with everybody, so I said, oh, he's not going to get me this time. So I walked down to the state dining room, which is all across the long corridor from the room, and the dancing went on, and I thought I was pretty safe. Johnson finished dancing, came down, found me near the state dining room and said, I haven't danced with you yet. And he marched me down the whole length of the state hall to the East Room to dance with me. And I thought, that's really, I cannot escape this president. So he had a really wonderful relationship, I think, with the press people. Of course, we were always down covering him at the ranch, and we were part of these wonderful drives through the ranch land where he had to show us all of his boyhood home and his favorite cattle and the goat that smoked cigarettes. So we got a lot of interaction with Johnson the man, which I think was very interesting, because I don't think many presidents of modern times allow press that kind of access that lets them, if you don't write about it, at least you get a feeling for what the president is like and what he's thinking. And he had a really lot of personal relations. That I have to tell a story which is not about me, but I was there, so I know that it happened. A friend of ours, Isabel Shelton, who was a reporter for the Washington Star, had put in for an interview with LBJ. And they called from the White House one Saturday morning and said, President will see you this morning. And it was her daughter's 14th birthday, and she was planning a birthday party, but she went to the White House. And as usual, the interview went on and on and on, and Johnson said at one point, are you going to that Boggs reception? It was a wedding reception for Cokie and Steve Roberts. And so Isabel said, yes, she was. So we said, well, come on, we'll go up there. So they went up to the wedding reception. I met Isabel there, and she told me that Johnson was doing this interview with her. And then when the reception was over, he came and got her and said, come on, drive you back. So they were driving back, and Isabel finally, she was desperate because she was supposed to put on this party for her daughter. So she said, Mr. President, I have to tell you, it's my daughter Gail's 14th birthday, and I really have to get home to a party. Oh, he said, whipped out a piece of paper, wrote a note, Dear Gail, sorry I held your mother up on her birthday. Happy birthday, Lyndon Johnson. And he stopped the motorcade, summoned another limousine, put Isabel in the limousine and sent her off to the birthday party, which was typical of the kind of personalized dealings he had with the press. And I'm running out of stories here for a while.
Stop for just a
yeah,
minute, or,
yeah.
let me know if
Okay. Well, Lady Bird Johnson was very unusual first lady, and she had so many activities, and she got into the beautification of this country, which was such a monumental landmark for her. And we covered her on many, many trips all over the country, and going into the Ozarks and riding the rafting in the Grand Canyon. And we had many wonderful trips with her. But the interesting thing was that I found out early on that when you asked Mrs. Johnson a question, there would be a pause, and first I didn't understand, and I was just would interrupt because I thought she didn't want to speak or something. But I later discovered that if you just waited, you would get the most beautiful response. She was just eloquent. And so I learned the trick. When you ask her a question, just wait, and Lady Bird will come out with the perfect answers. And I think she also was very accessible. We covered her in a lot of places. And I remember once we were in the Virgin Islands, and Helen Thomas and I had gotten on to the St. John's where Mrs. Johnson was staying. And we were looking for her one day, and we heard that she was out on a ship somewhere. So we were sitting on the beach with little binoculars looking out to see if we could find Mrs. Johnson. And all of a sudden there was a voice that said, "Hello, ladies," and that was Mrs. Johnson standing right behind us. So she also was very accessible to the press, and all of these trips that we went on doing beautification stories, she was always there with us, and you could have access to her all the time. And I think she had a wonderful time doing this, and I think it was the first start of environmental attention in wonderful ways. And I still look out at the highways where she succeeded in getting billboards off of them, and it seemed to be coming back a little bit, so we could use a Lady Bird to help us get that going again. Permitted the press to cover their White House receptions and parties. They didn't seem to have a fear that we would do something terrible or quote them badly if we went to a reception, notebooks in hand, which was quite unusual. In later years, they tried more and more bands of press actually covering these events. And they're very important because they show the interaction on a social level of our high officials and other visiting dignitaries, and it was all illustrative of what was going on. And Lady Bird were always accessible, important, and it's today we should learn that that is something that should be done, although presidents don't like that kind of access by the press. But in those days, Okay. I always loved the wonderful story about Cousin Oriole and the president when he bought a new amphibious car, and he rode up and invited Cousin Oriole to come take a ride with him, and he just went hell-bent for the Pedernales, and poor lady didn't have the vaguest idea that this was an amphibious car, and he went roaring into the water with it, and it was very, poor lady, I just wonder she survived it. But the Secret Service also had a story about they were pretty worried too with Johnson going into the water like that. But he liked to play jokes on people. He had a good time. These things, the press always stayed at the Driscoll Hotel in Austin when we were covering him while he was at the ranch. And it was a New Year's Eve time, and everybody was kind of celebrate and relaxed and nothing going on until the president showed up. And then everyone had to write a story, everybody scrambled. And he just loved to create surprises like that, and was appreciated, but not quite, when everybody had to work on time they were off. Oh, and there's another wonderful story. about Johnson. When he first came to the White House, he, I guess with Liz Carpenter's influence, was very interested in promoting women. And there was a big, I think it was a congressional dinner at which Johnson was a press club, Women's National Press Club dinner, at which Johnson was a guest of honor. And Elsie Carper, who was president at the time, she was worked for the Washington Post, and she tells the story of Johnson said to her, I think I'd like to announce a few women appointees. Would that be okay? So she said, sure. So he motions, and Jack Valenti comes out and hands him a little book. And at the dinner, he stands up there and announces, I think, 6 different women appointees and top jobs. Well, it threw everybody. The audience was predominantly journalists, all of whom then had to rush to the phone to announce these women appointees. No one knew who they were, no biographies, no nothing. Pierre Salinger, who was then working as the press secretary, was in the early days, hadn't the vaguest idea who anyone was, so it created a great staggering stampede, and all of which Johnson just loved. Okay.
Did he ever get mad at you?
Ever get mad at me? No, he never got mad at me, but there is this famous time when he had, after one of these receptions again, he had about 5 of us women were showing us around, and we ended up in the Oval Office, where he suddenly decided to call Jackie Kennedy and give a, friendly holiday greeting to her. It was around Christmas time, I think. And so he was on the phone and chatted with Jackie, and we're all there. He said he didn't want any of this to be on the record, so we didn't write anything that he said, but we did write that the president had made a call to Jackie Kennedy. And I guess, according to the Salinger's recollection and the president, that Jackie might not be so happy to have it known that he was talking to her in front of all these press women. And so he asked Pierre what we'd written. Pierre said he didn't think anything serious was going on. So then the president called me at home, said, hope you didn't get me in trouble with that. So I had to assure them we just wrote that he made the phone call. We didn't make any notation or comment that we had all been standing there while he made the call. So I guess that he wasn't mad at me, though. He was just wanting to know that we weren't getting him into trouble. Okay. Well, Liz Carpenter was a person who had been in the press corps for many years in Washington, and most of the press women knew her. We were all members of the Women's National Press Club at that time, and Liz had been a president of it, and we knew her very well. And she had covered Congress, and she knew Washington and the reporters. And I think that her appointment to be press secretaries was very fortuitous, because she knew us all. And I remember one thing about Liz knew about the care and feeding of the press. I remember going on I don't know where it was, but we were out somewhere with Lady Bird, and we were in a big tent, and we had our typewriters and telephones. We were all very busily working, and it was lunchtime. And I remember Liz Carpenter coming over and putting a plate of food down next to me. Care and feeding of the press. I had no time to stop with the Associated Press deadlines to get something to eat, which others were getting it. So she was aware enough and came around and dropped off some food for me. And it was these kind of things that Liz, because she was a friend and because she knew what reporters' problems were, that she was very well beloved by members of the press who made these many trips with Lady Bird. And of course I think that helped, although I don't think Lady Bird needed any help to get good press, because she was doing so many interesting and good things. But I think Liz, because of her background with the press and her own knowledge of press problems, was a very excellent choice for those jobs.
Right, don't stop. If you aren't going to answer this, just answer it as if I hadn't asked the question to start out as a story. Did you cover the weddings of either or both the girls?
I covered the weddings of both of the girls, which was very interesting because I think Linda who was later became good friends with us all, was very upset at our covering her wedding. I think she didn't want to have all that press around on the way down. And also what was fascinating because Liz permitted a press pool reporter to be behind a screen at the altar virtually for Linda Bird's wedding, so that she could tell us what the front view was, what their reactions were as they took their oaths and so on, which was another very unusual thing. But once again, Liz understood that would make a better story if people could see the exact reactions. You didn't have to look from the back. So Bonnie Angelo of Time magazine was the pool reporter and filled us all in on that event. Now, Lucy's wedding was in the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, which had probably the longest aisle to walk down of any wedding you can imagine. We figured it was as long as a football field, but it was typical for Lucy, who just loved all of that, and was quite an extravaganza in the shrine, which is a beautiful church, and so that was all. We were all covering that, and both of the weddings were very spectacular ones, and there was a lot of colorful things to write about. And I think that because we had so much access, we could do a better job than most presidential children's weddings are behind closed doors, or people who are celebrities like to keep the press out, and so they get much worse of a story when they're writing all about things from the outside than they do if they wrote a nice story about the actual wedding, which usually is very nice and can lend itself well to a story. So they were both wonderful events and very colorful, and I think press had a good job covering them because of the access that Liz made possible. I'm not sure that Lucy and Linda would. I think Lucy liked the publicity, but Linda was not too happy. Okay. Lady Bird traveled all over the West with us, and I think we were in the Grand Tetons, and we went on a horseback ride. It was the first time Art Buchwald had ever been on a horse. He was having quite a bit of difficulty, but he managed. We all went through all these things. Some people had never been on a boat as we went raft riding on the, I guess it was in the Rio Grande, and then we were also on the Snake River. And those were really wonderful trips in which we were able to see the whole countryside as nobody ever sees it, and with Lady Bird pointing the way to these wonderful spots that we needed to preserve to beautify the country. And we did have, they were very wonderful freewheeling things. I remember one of the groups, the water was down a little bit in one part of the Rio Grande, and they said they called their raft Martini on the Rocks. And, okay.
Fran, sorry, keep going, just ignore my ones. You reflected coming here, and I think I heard you once before, about what a special and unique time the Johnson period was. Or be a nice thing to end on.
Okay. I think one of the amazing things about the act to both the President and Mrs. Johnson, and their interest in the press as well. I think it was a kind of a really honest and mutual feeling. They understood the role of the press, and I think the press was very interested in covering the Johnsons, and not with really, there were plenty of critical stories written, and there was critical view of it, but there was no antagonism. And basically there was a friendly feeling. And I think in later years, particularly after the problems with President Nixon, in which there was so much attempt to withhold information, that the press's attitude in the White House has changed considerably, and today it's much more confrontational than it was. I think the Johnsons had a very wonderful time, and perhaps it was because following the assassination of President Kennedy, everyone really wanted the White House to work well and to be successful. And I think there was a different kind of an attitude. And I do think that even today that this confrontational gotcha journalism exists, and it did not exist at that time.
And you look back on that time as a somewhat golden time in your own life.
Yes, I really enjoyed the Johnson years. We traveled all over the country. I traveled all over the world with the Johnsons. And I think that it was an uplifting time. Except for the Vietnam War, which was, of course, was the terrible situation for Johnson and for everyone. And I think that was the downer. The early part, before we got deeply into Vietnam, was a much better period. But of course, as Johnson well knew, and that's another story that I wanted to tell, when the president made his dramatic, unexpected announcement that he was not going to run again, which surprised everyone. One of the interesting things was that within an hour and a half after he had made that announcement, which shocked everybody, he invited all of the regular press corps to come up to the Yellow Oval Room in the family quarters to talk to him about what had happened. And he had changed his clothes into more informal. He came out eating a dessert. And everyone was gathered there, and it was an emotional time for both the press and the presidential family. And it was surprising to all of us that, I mean, I don't know of a president today who, after making an announcement like that, would have everybody up for kind of an informal get-together to talk it over, almost like he figured that they were part of his family, which is totally unusual. And it was a very dramatic scene.
Good. I think that's great.
You remember that?